seek permits to send mixed plastics offshore from next year, would there be a cost to that process?
We understand there'll be a cost. That hasn't actually been, we haven't seen the developments that will happen, but we will need to seek permits from the EPA. We will also need to seek permission and have permission from the importing country to receive those materials as well.
Thank you. Okay, and my second area of questioning was about the recommendation that's in the report, which is an agreement in principle to reduce the range. I was interested in the second part, subject to undertaking consultation with the community on this change. So my question there is, are we required to undertake consultation? What would be the purpose of that consultation? What decision would come out of it?
We are required to undertake consultation. The bylaw is very specific. I might get Peter to, if that's okay, to answer those particular questions. But if we, do you want me to try, Peter, or do you want to?
Just let Peter answer.
So the requirements under the bylaw are that we undertake appropriate consultation. So in the situation here where the changes doesn't have a lot of practical options to it, our consultation is going to lean more towards the inform rather than seeking a range of options from the community. To that end, we're looking at a very communicative approach, trying to explain to the community why we're having to make this change, but still giving them the opportunity to have some feedback.
What would be the point of making feedback?
While we accept that there are very few practical options,
Yeah.
There still could be something out there that people raise that we haven't been aware of. Consultation is always an opportunity for people to bring new ideas. We don't think there are any, but the obligation still exists on us to undertake some form of consultation.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, team, for this report. I've got a couple of batches of questions, and I guess the first one is around what are the financial impacts for the end users of these services? So if we've got a system where people are currently paying for recycling that isn't actually being recycled, and you know we are potentially going to do less of that, would that be less recycling costs to the end users? And would that mean that, or you know, with less cost in terms of sorting, less storage space, maintenance, and on the other side, would there be more cost for, I guess, landfill, increased cost of rubbish bags? How does that affect people on the ground?
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Let me just find some earlier notes that I've made. Yeah, well, if I get tied up in knots, I'll get you to answer. But I think so. From a financial point of view, we indicated before that the operational cost to sort the mixed plastics is the equivalent of 1 FTE. Through attrition, there would be a reduction in FTEs, which would offset the cost of the sorting process of not collecting the FTEs. The landfill costs we've estimated to landfill the stockpile that we currently have will be between $55,000 and $65,000. There is already some cost associated with the stockpile that we hold, the sunk cost of that, and again, those costs are around about the cost of the FTE that we have in the operation space to sort and bale that product. Yeah, was there more to the question? Sorry. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting at is would there be other costs in that bracket on top of the 1 FTE? Because you've got the cost of the space itself and all of the renewals and maintaining the space, all of the health and safety that come along with 1 FTE, all of the, FTE is just, having an employee is one aspect of it, but there's a whole bunch of maintenance and renewal and other costs that could potentially be associated with collecting and sorting and investigating markets for this one product. And then on the flip side of that, would that add up to more or less than what's happening in landfill? And at the end of the day, would that mean that people on the ground would have to pay extra for their rubbish bags, I guess? You know, how does that all on both sides fit together?
So to answer your question about the rubbish bags, we've estimated that the amount of the average household is putting into the recycling bin of mixed grey plastics is roughly 200 to 500 grams a week. So it is unlikely to have an impact on the amount of rubbish that they are disposing of. Like I said, it will be an additional 200 to 500 grams. For reference, the average rubbish bag weighs about 6.7 to 6.9 kilos at the moment that we collect, and the average wheelie bin weighs about 7.1 kilos. So that's how we've determined those figures about the amount of mixed plastics going into the recycling bin that will now need to be diverted into rubbish. In terms of costs, I will say that the mixed plastics makes up about 5.6% of the total volume, or total weight of the recycling that we received. To put that into perspective, the MRF processed 5,375 tonnes in the 1920 year, and 300 tonnes of that is the mixed grey plastic. So it is a very small proportion of the total amount coming through the plant. So we don't expect to see, other than the FTE, any other operational savings in the MRF. Is that what you were asking? Have I answered the question?
Yes, thank you. And another question, if I may. So in terms of what we're sending off to landfill now, I guess our big issue is that we have, from my understanding, we have more waste going into landfill than previous years because more people tend to buy things. Am I correct in assuming that at the moment? Like, are we seeing an increase in rubbish, waste, ending up in our landfills?
We don't actually have all of the data to advise you that. What we do know as a country, as a nation, we are the highest in the OECD per capita for landfill. But in terms of a localised event, as you may remember when we presented our waste minimisation progress report on the waste management and minimisation plan, we didn't have any progress on our targets since we don't have that data at the moment. But we intend to provide that at the next report in September next year.
Okay, so I guess on that, because we've got more waste now going to landfill, if this is approved, are there other ways that we are able to reduce kind of waste going to our landfills? And so I suppose, where are we at with our waste minimisation plan? And are we doing anything literally in this annual budget or in the first year of the next? You know, is there any concrete actions that we are doing to counter that?
I think to try and answer the question is that we are following the current actions in the waste minimisation plan, but we haven't revisited the plan to specifically target and offset the diversion of this mixed plastics to landfill.
So the other thing that I'd like to add to that is a discussion that I've been having with the marketing and comms team, is that we're looking at, in early 2021, actually creating a waste hub on our website. So a lot more information about how you can reduce or minimise your waste in your home, in your garden, when you're out purchasing items. So to try to make better decisions that when you're purchasing things, to try to actually reduce the waste that you're creating in the first place. Mm-hmm. So we're trying, like, I guess, a multi-approach on that in terms of not only offering services to dispose or to recycle those items, but actually to try to reduce it in the first place as well. And that's what we're trying to achieve through that waste hub.
Excellent. And that was in early next year?
Our intention is to get it online early next year, but obviously resourcing might delay that a bit.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, team. Just one question. These attempts to secure a market for these mixed plastics, it says that you have made 2 efforts. What kind of efforts were that? Was it an international advertisement or direct contact with somebody who was already?
So In the past, and how we've always marketed or sold our mixed grade plastics is through a tender process. So we lodge a tender in the open market in New Zealand to what materials we have available for sale, and they are often tendered for through an intermediary who then combines them with all of the other grades of plastics from other MRFs throughout New Zealand and then ships them offshore for processing. When it comes to the mixed grade plastics, we have put up 2 tenders in the last 18 months and had no response for these items.
So it's a national level advertisement or tender, not international, because I understand there are still demand for these mixed plastics in some of the countries. Have you ever thought about doing on those lines?
No, we haven't. As I said, we use an intermediary in New Zealand who then obviously has communication with overseas markets, but we haven't looked outside of those markets, no.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Mike and Natasha. 2 questions. One is, if this goes through, we're effectively reducing the level of service for ratepayers around recycling. So can we expect an equivalent reduction in the rates charged for recycling?
We've already set or posted our budgets for next year in the process that you're going through for the LTP. But as Mike indicated previously, at the moment we are actually actively targeting those materials, so the 3s, 4s, 6s and 7s, by having having a staff member on the line. So if we're no longer targeting those materials, we will have, through natural attrition, we'll be able to remove an FTE off the line in order to do that, although those materials will now go into our waste stream.
So can ratepayers expect a reduction in the fixed charge for recycling?
I would imagine it.
Perhaps I can help answer that question. The complicated answer is the LTP is still to be established and the costs still to be put in, and we have no firm view yet whether the recycling charge for the individual household will go up or down. However, the savings that they've identified will be built into next year's rates numbers. Yes, so assuming we drop an FTE, we won't be rating for an unpaid position.
Thank you, Stuart. The second question I have is around a possible other options for the mixed plastics. So I'm aware that there are some operations that use plastics to burn to create energy. Has that been explored, or have you only explored the sort of recycling option, as it were?
So we don't have a lot of information on that. We're aware that that locally our neighbours at MDC are exploring options around a plastics recycling scheme, but to date, you know, the only information we've got is that is on hold where they're seeking funding. So we haven't factored that in.
Okay, thank you. Can I just say I'm having great difficulty hearing the speakers because there's a huge wind noise in the middle. So if you could please just speak up and be next to your microphones, it would be very helpful for us in this corner. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you both for your presentation. My question is around the contamination, and you know, when you look at these numbers, 3, 4, 6 and 7, they don't mean a lot to me, and I don't think they mean a lot to a lot of the or recyclers. So won't there be an increase in contamination or less recycling? Like, people are going to start looking at the stuff and say, oh, well, I don't know which is rubbish or which is recycling, so I'm going to toss the whole lot out. And then you're also still going to, for a period of a couple of years, people will still put that in their recycling. So how do you equate that to sort of an FTE? Because I thought it would take quite a while to, well, I'll ask the question.
Yeah, okay. The simple answer is that you're right. People will still be confused as to what is what in recycling. So there'll be, we anticipate, depending on the outcome of this report, that we will do a big education campaign to try and help people to understand what 3s, 4s, 6s and 7s are. But as Natasha said earlier, we anticipate that we will still get some residual contamination of those plastics coming into the plant. It's just that they won't then be targeted for recycling. They'll go, it's an operational matter, but they'll go off the end of the line as rubbish, so it won't need somebody to sort them. They'll kind of sort themselves, if you like, into a disposal pile.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Councillor, sorry.
I just wanted to add something. So the labelling has been identified by the MFE as an issue in terms of making sure that residents or the community can actually recycle right. So they are working with industry to improve, they are looking at working with industry, I should say, to improve labelling on containers to ensure that they end up in the right stream.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you. Thank you for the report too. Very much along the same lines as Councillor Beattie, but a couple of questions first in it. Now, being married to an addicted recycler, where everything has to be recycled almost, trying to explain to her what is a 1, 2 and 5 is going to be very awkward. So I presume you will have a pamphlet with all the photographs and everything else out to every household in Palmerston North to show them what the other ones are. These ones we don't accept, these ones we do accept.
As Mike said, we intend to engage on an education campaign about the types of products that you might find a 1, a 2 or a 5 in versus a 3, 4, a 6 or a 7. So there are certain products that you might get that you'll find a 1 in. For example, a 1 is PET, so that's a soft drink bottle, a water bottle. Some of the squeezy mayonnaise tomato sauce bottles are a 1. I was checking this morning actually in my fridge when I was having my breakfast. So 2 is HDPE, and they are generally milk containers, or what we call janitorial products, so likes of your household cleaners, your shampoo products. 3 is a PVC, so there aren't actually a lot of containers that are made out of PVC. They're traditionally trays that takeaways come in. The other one that I can think of that are 3 might be a bottle, quite a large bottle with a distinct handle, because the PVC is more rigid, so that's why there's the handle associated with it. There are very few containers that have a 4. What's next? So 5 is your ice cream containers and your 1 litre yogurts.
Okay.
So yeah, we will be putting, what I'm trying to get across is that we'll be putting information about what to look for when you purchase a product, that you need to look for that number on the bottom. But as I indicated previously, there is some work in that space about increasing the labelling.
So in other words, all the takeaways, the meat trays and stuff, we have to go to rubbish for that one.
Some of them are actually 1s. So the trays are actually probably the most difficult one, because they're actually they can either be a 1, 3, 5 or 6.
Okay.
But as I indicated before, there is current consultation about removing 3s and 6s as a container that's available for that product. So they will be if this consultation proceeds, some of them will be phased out by January 23, and some of them will be phased out by January 25.
So have you done, have you had a look at the actual, what this is going to cost to do this education program or the pamphlets and whatever you're going to do? Or was it just an idea, we're going to do an education program? Or have you got a costume set aside for it?
We haven't costed it out, but we always have funds in our budget to do education. Education in this space is an ongoing activity for us.
It's going to be quite a large project, is it not?
Do you want to?
Through you, Mr.
Is that okay? Sorry, Mr. Mayor, is that okay?
So if we proceed with consultation, what we're looking at doing, as Peter said, is using it as an education. So talking about what these numbers are, and we have some tables made up that are really easy to understand, because realistically the average people around the table, it's mainly one of the numbers that affects everything that we buy, which is pretty much everything your food comes in your pantry. Everything that you can scrunch in your hand is pretty much something that you need to question. So we've got some really strong messaging on that. The other element of the education campaign is encouraging people to look at their containers when they're at the supermarket, and if there is another option, going for a one or one of the other options that can be recycled, reminding them of consumer power that they have. You know, the public changed single-use plastic bags, microbeads, so encouraging them that if they have a favourite product that is made in packaging that isn't recycled in New Zealand, to get in touch with the food producer and ask for that. And also just when they are buying takeaways, asking what those containers are, and encouraging businesses to switch to more environmentally friendly models as well. So we're looking at kind of building that element into the any consultation, but then when a decision is made and a date is set for if we don't proceed with collection, then a much heavier marketing and communications campaign will continue. But in the interim, getting a reduction in those numbers is beneficial for either if we do make a decision to continue to store it, or a reduction in landfill, things going to landfill.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, a couple of questions from me. This is all sounding quite complicated, and I'm, we as councillors, we're struggling a little bit with it. I'm just wondering how the public are going to. Does all the effort and cost possibly outweigh the benefits without a national sort of overlay over all this?
It is quite complicated, you're right, but I think this will simplify things. If we move to simply collecting 1s, 2s and 5s, I think that's a message that we can give clearly to people. It's 3 numbers. Most products, as Natasha said, do have that stamp on them, and certainly, if they don't, then we wouldn't accept it anyway. But yeah, I think a simple message through our comms team will remove some of the confusion. And the report goes on to say that we don't have good markets for coloured PETs, but we're not talking about removing them because that would just add to the confusion. So 1s, 2s and 5s is a message that we'll be pushing should this proposal be accepted. So
currently, with those some of those mixed ones that you're sending offshore, what happens to them? Are they melted down for energy or oil or something when they go offshore? Do we know what actually happens to them?
It is our understanding that when they're shipped offshore, the bales are broken up and they're regraded, and the plastics are reprocessed at that market that they've been received into, but how they're reprocessed, we're unaware.
What, are they ground up or something, are they?
So, I mean, I'm not a chemist, I'll be honest, and I'm not a processor, but for example, we have budget plastics here in Palmerston North that accepts 1s, 2s and 5s from us. And there's a combination of ways there, but they're generally melted down, and they're graded into their individual products. The contamination is removed, like the paper, or the labelling, the sticky glue, the adhesive is removed. They're then melted down, and then they're sent through an extruder, and they make like these long noodles, and then they're broken into little pellets, and then those pellets are then distributed to manufacturers where they're melted again, and they're extruded into the products that they're made into.
Right, okay, thank you. Councillor Beattie, you've popped back in again.
Just like to ask the question, is the comms for this included in existing budgets, or will we be looking for additional money for a campaign?
I think, as I explained before with Councillor Finlay's question, is that we always have a budget for educating, and Olivia and I have been talking about the comms plan, and I've set her a budget which is within our current budget.
So it is within the current budgets. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to colleagues that have done a great job of asking most of the questions that were on my mind. Just a couple left. The first one is that we're already in a competitive market locally around our waste services, and some of those are delivered through council, and some of those are delivered through the private sector. If this goes ahead, this sort of takes things out of the free bin and puts them in the pay-as-you-go bag, and they're pretty high volume sort of material. So I'm just wondering, has any analysis been done to work out if this sort of changes our competitive stance in the market vis-a-vis the private providers, and if we might think there might be any migration of households from council service to other providers as a result of this.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we don't anticipate there being a mass migration away from our council bags to private collectors. Because as Natasha said earlier, we're probably talking around about that 200 to 300 grams of product by weight, but by volume could be a different matter. So there might be something in our education campaign around, you know, when we're receiving in our recycling, we don't encourage people to squish things. We want them whole because it's easier to process. But going into the rubbish bags, we might encourage people to squish them down. By weight, it's a very small amount, but by volume, it could be an issue. So, yep.
So, I guess to the question of whether any sort of analysis was done around that, has there been any formal analysis around that potential drift of customers, or is it just more sort of your assessment as
It's kind of anecdotal at the moment. We haven't done a formal assessment.
Thank you. Next question is just around the waste management and minimization plan. When's that plan to be reviewed?
So it was came into force. I'm trying to think. It came into force in 2019. Sorry, not 20. 2019. Under the legislation, it needs to be reviewed within 6 years, so by 2025. However, given the a lot of changes that have occurred in the government and policy and planning going forward, I have anticipated an early review. So I have I've proposed budgets for next year to start that process next year, to do what we call the waste assessment and swap in 2020, the first year of the LTP, that's easier. Yeah. So in the first year of the LTP and in the second year of the LTP, right at the beginning, we will be seeking a workshop with councillors to review the waste minimisation plan.
Great, thanks. That's helpful to be reminded of that time frame. And finally, just wanted to understand, there's been several questions that have come through around sort of the education and communications campaign that will support both the consultation and subsequent to any decision that's made on the basis of that consultation. Just wanted to understand sort of what tracks of education are in there. It sounds like there's a little bit about helping people count to 7, which is important. But how much education actually sits in there around making, you know, lower plastic type choices in their lifestyle so that we actually reduce the amount of plastics in the waste stream in the first place?
That's the purpose of the Waste Hub that Liv and I have been talking about, is that to actually bring a lot of the information that is on our website through the Guru's Guide and what you can put in your recycling bin and what you can't, but actually then to provide a bit more further information about making decisions when you purchase. I'd have a look at, I think it's called fightthelandfill.co.nz. Is that, am I got that one right, Liv? So pardon? Yep. Fightthelandfill.co.nz. That's actually Hamilton City Council's website that they have, and we're looking at content that is similar to what's on there that will be included in ours. But it won't be a separate website, obviously. It will be within our own.
Okay, so I guess I'm hearing from that about the sort of content. I'm not hearing about how loud we're going to shout about it. I'm just wondering how much push will end up sitting behind those sort of messages.
So also on top of that, we've been engaging with Environment Network Vanuatu and the Palmy Plastics Pollution Challenge, and Heather is sitting in the chambers with us, about how we can work with them to get those messages out there about making those better decisions. So they've presented some ideas to Liv and I about what we could add to our website to help people make better decisions about when they purchase items.
Great, thank you. That's been very helpful, Mr. Mayor. All right, are there any more questions? I know some of the these aren't working that well. So no more questions? All right. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Michael. Right, we have a resolution there, and we also have an extra notice of motion here from Councillor Barrett and Councillor Bowen. I'll perhaps take that one first, because I think it's, well, a lot of the questions have been put on, it's been moved first. Do you want to bring that up, please? Councillor Barrett, do you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, happy to speak briefly, and as a number of us have asked questions around the table about the education campaign, and really encouraging to actually hear that some work's already underway and bringing it in train. This is specifically about the education aimed at reducing the amount of plastic coming into the system, less about helping people differentiate between what number goes where. Sounds like some of that's already underway. Putting this motion through will simply ensure that when the next decision comes back to us, we'll actually get to see that campaign so that we'll understand what's in it, how high it's aiming, how far it will go. And I think it'd be very appropriate for us as a council to understand that alongside making a decision about an ongoing cut in service to the recycling program. So I'd ask you to support it. Sounds like the work's already in train, but I think this will just clarify it and ensure that it comes back to council at an appropriate time in the next phase of decision making, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Anybody else wish to speak to this? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was happy to second this report, and in response to the answers to questions received, do see it as a necessary additional step. The primary recommendation that we'll come to next talks about community consultation, which is, it seems from the answers received, we very much and very appropriately focused on the change that we're putting to our community. This recommendation asks for a bigger picture look at the education and other options that might support the reality of where we find ourselves in the recycling space. So looking at that bigger picture of how people engage in reducing their waste from their households. I think that is necessary. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to support this motion. I think as a community, we need to make sure that we are actually looking after our own waste in our own area as well. We do have limited resources, and there's only so much landfill we can contain. And we do need to be looking at this now and looking at this for people in the future as well. And this motion kind of helps to get some of that communication going so that we can actually talk to our community about the issues that we're facing in the waste space. I think we definitely need to encourage our community to think about everything that they buy and what happens at the end of it, because recycling actually should be a last resort. We're not here to make money off the used plastics. We're here to look after our people and our planet. And I think being able to communicate some of these issues to our community instead of that rhetoric of, oh, it's fine, it's going in the recycling, she'll be right, would be a good thing. And I would welcome more urgency around this and also around our waste minimisation.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The officers also, I'm happy to support this, the officers also talked about businesses being very mindful about what containers they used. And I think being a business owner, we are very mindful of that, and we are looking at this. And I know as a business, we have got containers that are, what do I know is the word I want to use? Yeah, that's it. So, and I know other businesses do that as well. So it is something that most businesses are thinking about now and are trying to do that in their way of trying to be environmentally friendly. So I do think that most businesses are thinking about that when they are using containers that can basically reflect that in their business model. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Mr. Mayor, it's a question through you to the mover, if that's okay. Can you just explain how this would be different to what the officers outlined will be happening in terms of an education campaign anyway?
Yes, I think the key difference is it'll ensure that we have awareness as elected members of the scope and scale of what's going to happen sort of before it rolls out. And again, this is not about COM sitting alongside the consultation process. This is sort of foreshadowing an assumed outcome that we're more than likely going to cut the recycling service, which would then be a very timely point, while it's raised in people's consciousness, to have a strong campaign around a lower plastic lifestyle. So it would be an opportunity to understand the scope and scale of that at that point in time.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anybody else wishing to speak? There being none, right, a reply back to you.
Thank you. Just to briefly thank Councillor Harpiter for raising very explicitly the point around businesses and where they fit in here, and certainly when the word community sits in this recommendation, it absolutely speaks to business as well as households. So would look forward to seeing a campaign that addresses that. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and I'm just speaking to the acting CE that this work will come back to your committee. Yeah. Okay. All right. We will look to vote on this one, please. It's passed, 15 votes for, none against. Right, we'll go back to the substantive motion there. I'll look to move that. Seconder. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, I think it's been well circulated. I just would like to say that we do need to communicate, and I think the last resolution that we just passed around education for our residents and actually our business community as well is warranted. I would say there needs to be a real joined-up approach nationally with a strategy and speaking to the acting infrastructure manager. It's something we need to push our central government colleagues on, and in all of councils, because all councils do this differently. Our colleagues at MDC are doing it differently and wanting to take everything. We're starting to push back on some things. So the removal of these hard mixed plastics from consumer products, I think, is the way to go, and pressuring either the suppliers, and you can do that with your own voting of buying consumer goods or not buying them. So I think this is a bigger issue here. So I'm supportive of the motion in principle, but it does need to have quite a lot of education for behaviour change in the background as well. Right, Councillor Barr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually really pleased to support this recommendation because it reflects what actually is happening in reality, that we're not recycling lots of the things that people currently think we're recycling. It's exactly the same conversation we had with the single-use plastic bags, where we bundled them up and kept them for a long time in the hope that the market would turn, and it never did. So absolutely, we should be honest with our community about what we can do and what we can't. They should have confidence that what they think is being recycled is actually being recycled. But I know that in itself will cause a problem here, because people have put things in their recycling expecting it to be recycled, and now we're saying it's actually all going to go to landfill, and that is a huge volume of material that is now going to be put in a hole in the ground, because there is no way for this. We're just burying it. And anybody who's following the resource management application for the Auckland landfill will know that these conversations are not getting any easier. You know, as we consider more seriously our role as guardians and stewards of our environmental resources, of our planet, as we consider the input of tangata whenua into those conversations, landfill itself is becoming a scarce resource. We need to be very careful about what we decide to put into landfill. So I very much accept reducing the amount of plastics that come through our recycling, but that comes with a great deal of concern about the impact on our landfill capacity. Recycling, I think, as Councillor Dingwall said, should be the last option. It's mostly PR. We can't actually, there's gold in mobile phones. It takes 41 mobile phones to recycle a gram of gold, I think, and we can't even make that pay because it's too expensive to get people to take the gold out of mobile phones. So if we can't make recycling gold pay, I have very great doubts about yogurt pots. So the reality is that recycling should be our last resource. We should be working in the education space of waste minimisation, of people making good choices with their consumer dollar. And I really hope that this is the start of that conversation. There may well be advances in technology that help with this, but even in the biodegradable space, when you get to your biodegradable cup on your takeaway coffee, it's not biodegradable. It's only biodegradable in a commercial composter, and nobody is putting those in commercial composters. So there's an element of greenwashing goes into all of this, and the answer isn't that. The answer is to have good solutions and work with the supply chain, and that's where I think we're heading, so I very much support it. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. This does have a bit of a feel of inevitability about it, I suppose. Just one more thing in 2020, the year that keeps on giving. I think actually quite a few people in the community will be quite disappointed, and some will be quite surprised by this as well. I think we've had now decades where we've sort of lulled ourselves into this idea that we could just bring all that stuff into the household, wasn't going to matter, plastics, whatever, we'll just sort of magically recycle our way to sustainability. And this, seeing the system break down in this way at this time, I think is quite a big wake-up call. It needs to be a wake-up call to us as a community, but also very much to central government to start moving on this. Community after community after community across the country is facing and making similar decisions as we speak. Something has to happen, and it needs to be coordinated out of Wellington.
All right, nobody else wishing to speak? Okay, all right, I think it's been well circulated, so we will vote, please. That is passed, 15 votes for, none against, thank you. We now move to number 7, Junior Skate Park, and we have a memo there presented by the acting infrastructure manager, Mike Moynihan. Oh, sorry. No, it isn't. It's the Parks manager, Kathy Deaver-Todd.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, Cheryl Bryant has asked that I present this report. I was involved in the preparation of this report. So just take the report as read, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'm just getting to where we are, page 43. Okay, we have some questions. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Part of the report, it suggests $70,000 for a feasibility study to determine the need and safety issues, and I'm just wondering if you could identify what you would expect a feasibility study would tell us.
Certainly. So the presentation to council was about a symptom, but we haven't defined what the underlying problem is at this stage. When the skate park was designed, it was deliberately designed to allow both junior and senior skateboarders to interact and to be together. And speaking to people following the presentation, it seems like part of the concern is that that worked well for a while, but the volume of skaters has increased, and that is what is now causing some of the problem. And there's been some other suggestions as well. So really this is about defining what the actual problem is before we can therefore, as part of the feasibility study, look at what the practicable options are. One of those has been raised by the presenter, but there are potentially others, and some of the things that we would consider as part of the feasibility is if we're looking to solve this problem as it is now, and if it was a volume-related problem, what is to say that won't occur in the past if it becomes more successful? So when we're looking at options, we need to look at the types of options, the scale of those options, the practicality of fitting those options in, and of course there are non-asset solutions as well, and potentially there are some things around signage and management and governance. And for those of you who've been in the city for a while will remember that the first iteration of the skate park was managed through YOS, and there was management processes in place, and that's how these conflicts were managed in the past. So it's really feasibility looks at those things, and then associated with that, then what is the filter that we lay over the top of that says, okay, well that's not a practicable option. What are the costs associated with those? And then also going forward, the things around demand and the levels of service, and whether if we were to produce something, is it part and integrated into the current skate park, or is it a completely standalone? So a feasibility study brings all those things forward, and then brings forward to you what the capital and ongoing operational costs, the risks, the level of service delivered, and all those things together to enable a decision to be made on what is the option that we proceed forward with.
So further to that, Kathy, in all reality, and being a little bit more pragmatic, do you really think that a junior skate park would be somewhere else and not connected to the skate park itself?
So that's an interesting point, because if you look at the design principles of the original skate park, it was designed around the principle that junior skaters could skate there, could see others skating alongside them, that they could progress through the park and grow their skills and their confidence, and do that with siblings who may be older and with supervision. So we need to consider those principles as well. So some discussions have been, well, maybe we need greater separation but a connected park, and others have said keep it separate. But there are pluses and minuses to those two things. So it really comes back to what is the problem we're trying to solve. And once we understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve, as I said, the concern about safety is a symptom of an underlying problem. Once we understand that problem, then only then can we make that decision around whether complete separation is better or integration into the existing.
And it's officers' opinion that we need $70,000 to do that?
Our experience from the original skate park proposal that came forward, so I'm talking here about the extension to the existing skate park, is that this was the order of costs associated with that. Bearing in mind the railway land is also a very special piece of land to the community, and a project like this would not only require some community consultation in and around those options, but also a resource consenting process. So in particular for this project, it's not just quite as simple as going forward and saying this is what it would cost. So yes, that figure is realistic based on our experience on the last extension.
Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I certainly had a question about the cost of the feasibility study, because I mean, 70,000 is a decent salary for someone for a year. Can you break down that 70k in any way as to, how it's costing that much for a feasibility study?
I guess the thing around this is the planning aspects. So when we're looking at the planning aspects, and the engineering aspects of the feasibility, we are talking about specialist skills. We are, even if I just look at the staff that work for me and the hourly rate for if we did this in-house versus externally, that doesn't actually equate to a lot of hours. But then on top of that, we will have to do some engineering work and some planning work as well.
So it also includes elements of design, does it? Is that what you're saying?
It will include elements of preliminary design that are needed to understand the feasibility of the option that comes forward to council, yes.
Okay, and then on the design and build costs, again, before we might agree to refer this to the long-term plan, I'd need to have some confidence that those costs refer to something and they're not just a guesstimate. I mean, how concrete are those costs?
They're pretty concrete actually, because it wasn't that long ago that we extended the skate park, And so we have a good understanding that 350 would buy you a basic junior area, and 500 would be a junior area with a slightly higher level of service. So we're pretty confident that that's the quantum you're looking at.
Okay, because in the past, when figures like this have come up and we've put them in a plan, and then the actual design comes to us a year or two later, often the cost is much more than what was put in the plan. And then there are comments around, you know, oh, this project has, you know, had a blowout. So I guess if we're thinking of putting this amount in the plan, are you confident that a junior skate park could be delivered for this?
I appreciate your comments, and I do understand that has happened on a number of projects. I think the real advantage with this project is it wasn't that long ago that we extended the skate park, and so we have a good understanding, and also we did the junior road safety park, so we have a good understanding of the costs associated with these types of facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
My question's been asked, so I thought I'd remove myself. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Kathy. Can you tell me, are you aware if we have had submissions in the past requesting something of a similar nature at the skate park?
I'm not personally aware of that, no.
And what about previous petitions?
Again, I've only been with the council for 2 years, so I can't make any commentary on that other than what was included within the last project to extend the park. I can say, though, that I have been through all the K-base inquiries of issues that have been raised with council. Most of those relate to issues with vandalism with the public toilet or glass on the skate park. We've only had one reported incident of an accident, and that was a request to council to remove blood on the skate park itself. But there have been no, through our customer inquiries, anything in that system. But if there have been emails or other requests outside of that, I'm not aware of those.
Okay. And do we have any idea of the nature of police involvement of any incidents at the skate park besides the request to clean the blood? We're not aware of any major call-outs or anything down there that are, I guess, that are not related to maybe evening drinking or any of those sorts of things?
Not that we're aware of, but that, with respect, that question might be better directed at Councillor Hancock through, because that type of information comes through in that reporting through that community group.
Sure. Okay. With the feasibility study, you've obviously mentioned that it's the opportunity to understand the problem and find out what the issue is. I'm wondering whether there's I guess a step before that that would assess whether there's a need to progress to a full feasibility study. I appreciate the feasibility study is to find out if there is an issue, but it's a lot of money to find out if there is an issue. And so I'm wondering whether there's a step before the feasibility study or whether there's just not the resource to take that step at the moment.
Yeah, so the regional sports facilities framework provides for a pre-feasibility and a feasibility study follows on from that. And if the pre-feasibility, which could be a lot quicker, and we could bring some information back to you on that. The purpose of the report is really to make sure that councillors are aware that the current recommendation from the committee on the table wouldn't achieve, in terms for the long-term planning process, what you'd like to achieve. So if you wish to split that amount or create that so only that provision was there and then we went through one step and if all that funding wasn't needed and you don't go past go, then that's fine. The intent of the report is to just say that because you're in the middle of a LTP planning process, if you don't make some provision at this stage, then it's going to be very difficult to try and bring that project in later.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no further questions? Okay, thank you, Kathy. All right, we have an alternative recommendation, which I'll get brought up and we'll discuss that one first. And this is from Councillor Naylor and seconded by Councillor Harper. Councillor Naylor, I'll let you speak to it.
Thank you. I'm really comfortable to support funding to be referred to the long-term plan process for the design and build of a skate park, but I'm not convinced that spending $70,000 on a feasibility study is necessary as a part of that process. I think the report talks about identifying the need and the safety issues. I don't think it's good value for money for us to spend a lot of money telling us something we already know. I mean, if we look at, if we ask ourselves the question, the young people in our community need additional recreational facilities, then I think the answer is yes. I think how we get there doesn't need to be as complicated as that. The options that the design and build have identified in the report as being $350 to $500, and I think the appropriate place for weighing that up and prioritising it is through the LTP process. So the recommendation in front of us here, seconded by Councillor Harper, is really the same as what was in the report, but taking that feasibility study component out and the cost of that.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support this recommendation. Wasn't happy with the 70,000 being in there, even though that's what the other recommendations suggested. I do think that we should progress this, and we could look at alternatives in terms of funding with a partnership model, as we did with the Junior Road Safety Park. I do think that we could look at other ways in which we could fund this. We do need to start looking at other ways to do things going forward, and we can look at other funders in the city, because we can do that. There are groups in the city that are looking for projects like Lions, which will look to help support us, and we do need to start looking at doing that. So I think that's what we should be doing. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm sorry, I cannot support this. You cannot take the feasibility money out, because a design and build project is design and build. We need money for understanding what the project is, where it's going to go, planning and all that. You have to do your planning, your resource consents and all that before you design. So you've got to have money in there. So I suggest we go back to the first two recommendations. If you don't want to spend 70,000, perhaps you reduce it to 35,000 or something else, but I can't support this as it is.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this. I think that it seems silly to go straight to a design and build stage of a facility when we don't even know if we need it or if the community is asking for it. So we've heard from some young people that there is an issue. It was quite clearly identified from the staff member that this is a symptom of something that we don't quite know what that is just yet. And so to take out any sort of investigation to actually determine the need seems like we are potentially going ahead and wasting $350,000. I appreciate that there are lots of funding opportunities, but as we've seen in the last week with another one of our facilities that we are struggling to get funding for, I don't think that funding is readily available for projects at the moment in the current environment. And so we would need to progress this understanding that actually we would be paying the bill, and I just don't think that this is a sensible way of going about that, going straight to the end product.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm supportive of this project, and I'm supportive of actually going through the proper recommended steps to actually do the feasibility study. The amount of 70,000 is questionable, and I guess when we come to the long-term plan and the draft, we can work out an amount whether 70,000 is the right amount or not, or something potentially less from that. This is a community-led initiative. I think it needs our full support. As far as the needs go, I think it just is very evident that it's a well-used facility, and you only have to ask an 11-year-old that's been down there, is it fair and have space for the younger kids, and they'll tell you that it's not safe for them. And this is a symptom of the skate park's success, and we should be very pleased that we're getting demand and requests for extensions to the space. I don't think we needed to identify other spaces. Even in the feedback, it seems that it's a park that's great to have the younger kids there to model on in that family experience where a parent can take both, you know, a younger child and an older child. So I think the location suits well, but the feasibility will navigate the issues that have been outlined by the officer, like the resource consenting, which is part of the process, and that wider community consultation, let alone the aspects and elements of the new park being created. And so I'm going to oppose this recommendation and go through and perhaps move a notice of motion at this point that if this fails, that we go through with the officer's recommendation in the report and look for a seconder. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will not be supporting this because I believe we need to do something at the skate park reasonably quickly. My daughter graduated on Thursday, and I was out there watching her march, and I noticed in the ANZ quadrant over here, by the memorial there were 10 older skateboarders using that for practicing their skateboarding. So I asked them why they weren't using the skate park and using the square, and their answer was very simple: oh, that's not for us. So we do need to do something, because we originally built the skate park to get the skaters out of the square. Well, we're now in a situation where the older skaters are now coming back to the square. So we need to address the situation and get it fixed as soon as possible, because the damage they're doing on the square is quite noticeable. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I think, oh, sorry, I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Johnson. Just popped in. Look, I'm supportive of this project, and I think Councillor Finlay has identified there is a lot of skateboarders in our city, and we've seen a lot of them around the square and even around our building. Later at night, I can hear the noise of the wheels going all the time. So there is a real need for this, and look, if it makes the cut and is prioritised in our LTP, then I'm supportive. I think it comes down to the question, and I'm, like some of the members here, a little bit unsure of a full-blown feasibility study if that's totally required. But the officer did talk about a staged, a pre-feasibility process or stage. I'm unsure whether it needs to be 70,000, but I do think there is some checks and balances that need to be put in place, and I think the officer answered those questions reasonably well in terms of what is the issue. We need to identify that first, and have we got everything in place, rather than going straight to a design and build. As elected members, we know best, we should be there. There's an element of that, because it is a political decision as well. But I do think there needs to be some staged pre-feasibility. I'm unsure that it's 70 grand, and I think a lot of us were questioning those costs. So unfortunately, I won't support this, but I will support a substantive motion to continue the work in a proper process. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I won't be supporting this. I must say, just on the papers, I was a little sceptical of the feasibility study because it did seem, just from the report, that the feasibility study would be telling us something we already knew, which was that there was a problem at the skate park. But in answering the questions, I thought the officer made it quite clear that the feasibility study isn't about just determining that there's a safety issue. The feasibility study is also about establishing what the best solutions for that might be. Now, the best solution might not be to build a junior skate park. So it would seem foolish to me to go straight to saying that we want to build one when we don't actually know that that's the answer to the problem. So I know we all feel that we know there's a problem of safety, but the feasibility report isn't just about rehashing the issues of safety. The feasibility report, as I understand it, talks about what potential solutions might be, and the officer canvassed some of those. So I think it would be very foolish to go straight to 350k for a skate park when actually that might not solve the problem So I just think it would be more sensible for us to have a clear understanding of what possible solutions to safety for younger skaters there are before going forward with an asset building project.
Thank you, councillors. Back to you, Councillor Naylor, for a right reply.
Thank you. Colleagues, there's been some good points made in the discussion here, and I certainly acknowledge there does need to be appropriate planning for something like this. I guess what I'm trying to avoid is money spent unnecessarily, and I think some of the efforts that appear to be being made by staff to try and provide evidence for the safety issues, I think perhaps is a track that's not the best. You know, if we're looking at K-bases or looking at complaints as a way to evidence safety issues, I'm not sure that that's the best place to look. I think if, as a parent of a young child, if that child gets hurt because there's too many people at the skate park or there's bigger kids who make it an unsafe place, I think what that parent is going to do is say, you can't go there, as opposed to ringing the council and making a complaint. So I think the other thing is, in terms of what has been included in the description for that feasibility study, is talking about a consultation process, and I think that, in my view, the LTP is that consultation process. So if we have a program identified in the LTP, that is the way that we would engage with our community to consult. So I'm hearing that perhaps this might not be well supported, and certainly the option that Councillor Beattie suggested of a feasibility study with a lower price tag on it, I would certainly be open to. But I think it's important for us to ensure that budgets that are put forward are good value for money, and I wouldn't like to see a lot of work go into aspects of that, the costing that perhaps isn't necessary. So I'll support this, but if it fails, I'll certainly support the original recommendation with an amendment to have that at a lower rate. Thank you.
All right, councillors, we have the motion there and we'll vote on this one only. Thank you. And that is lost 2 votes for and 13 against. All right, we'll move now to the substantive. That is there. Now, Councillor Dennison, you look to move that. We have a seconder for that. Councillor Bowen, thank you. Oh, sorry, I thought there's okay. All right, there's a few others if you don't want to, so that's fine. All right, Councillor Dennison, do you want to speak to this?
Only as an additional point to say, there seems to be a question mark around the amount of 70,000, but I think the draft debate around the long-term plan will deal with the amount, and we don't need to address that now. This motion allows for it to be advanced to that discussion. Thank you.
I'm getting officers shaking, nodding, so not shaking their heads, nodding in agreement with what you've just commented on, so I'm sure that's covered. Councillor Naylor. Okay. Councillor Bowen.
Yes, this time. Yes, I'm supporting this. I'm glad we had the discussion about the earlier notice. I think that's flushed out some really important issues around process. And I think, as Councillor Johnson says, on the face of the report, I was sceptical about that feasibility study, but the officer clarified usefully what that means and what the value is we'll get from that. Just like to see maybe a slightly lower dollar amount attached to it. I think the points made that I've taken from this debate are that a junior skate park might not be the answer. And I'm sure many of us have followed the social media commentary that's come through as a result of the petition to council, where actually I think what's being said is that the skate park as it currently stands is actually fine for juniors, The problem is the volume of use. And so the solution might be a better senior skate park, which maybe responds to some of the concerns Councillor Findlay was raising. So yes, let's look at this. Let's scope out what the problem is and what it isn't, not just take the one piece of evidence that's been brought forward as, yes, chapter and verse on that subject. And I think in that way, the feasibility study is value for money and will provide useful information as part of that community consultation of the LTP. Thank you.
Thank you. Nobody else wishes to speak? Just with our technology down a little bit. Back to you, Councillor. No right of reply required. Okay, we will vote, please. As passed, 15 votes for, none against. Right, we'll move through to number 8, which is the order of candidates' names on voting documents. We have a paper at page 47 from our governance manager, Hannah White. Hannah.
Happy to take as read, Mr. Mayor, and answer any questions.
Okay, page 47 to 50. So I'll open it up for any questions. There are a few. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Hannah. Hannah, I saw in the paper that we'd already advertised this as random. So is our process to actually advertise before we've made the decision?
Well spotted, Councillor Beattie, through you, Mr. Mayor. It came to my attention after we dealt with the by-election matters that the previous resolution of this council was in fact only for the 2019 general local body election and not in fact for the period until the next election. So you're correct, it should have been done before the notice, and if there was a change we would need to put a new notice.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think the officer may have just answered what I was going to ask, which is that the decision that we make today, that only stands for this term of council? Or is it something that has to be renewed every term, I suppose, is what I'm asking?
If council put the wording that it was specific for this by-election, it would only hold for this by-election. The way the paper has put it to you as a recommendation is that we leave it as an open-ended so that we don't end up in a similar situation again. Noting, of course, that at any point, if there was a will to change the method that we used, that we could rescind and replace with a new resolution.
So this will be an enduring resolution then, would it?
That is the intention of the recommendation in the paper.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to move option C.
I'll come. All right. Is that what you're on the list for? Okay. All right. You've cut to the chase. Thank you, Councillor. All right. We have the resolution there. There's no more questions. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. So moved by, so it's C, so we strike out A and B. And it is moved by Councillor Johnson, second by Councillor Findlay. Relatively straightforward. Councillor Johnson, would you like to speak to it any further?
Just briefly. We've traversed the arguments for this previously a number of times, but I will just make the point that the studies do show that there is advantage in being high up the list alphabetically, and the putting the names in random order does enable a fairness in the voting procedure, which I think is important.
Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thanks. Just to briefly thank the officer for actually bringing this to us in a way that it's an enduring decision. It's always seemed a little bit odd that we have to reconsider this all the time. So brilliant to see that we can make a decision that can hopefully hold for the foreseeable and contribute to the efficiency of time and decision-making around the table here.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just reflecting on a previous discussion of this council around electoral matters and saying, in this case, as a B, the turkey is voting for Christmas.
Careful what you wish for. All right. Councillor Dennison.
They might be voting for Christmas, but I just wanted to point out that the Bs and Ds that have been elected in the past stand on their own credibility and not on the alphabetical order. Thank you.
On that note, I think we'll vote. Has passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. We now move to number 9, which is our council work schedule, pages 51 or 52. And I'll take that as being read. I'm quite happy to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any discussion. Councillor Naylor.
Just a question really on why the meeting schedule for next year has been deferred another month. It had already been deferred from October, and in particular it would be good to at least know the start day for next year's meetings before the 21st of December.
All right. The reason for the hold-up is CE and myself and Deputy Mayor wanted to have one final look and discussion on it. That's been had. And just obviously you block out every Wednesday, starting from the 10th of February. And it is coming early to the earliest meeting, which I think is the 10th of... We're going to do an extraordinary meeting, so it's nice and early in your calendars in early December. All right. Good. No further comments? Matters arising? No. We will vote, please. It's passed 14 votes for and none against. I'll just comment, we have a belated or late apology from Councillor Beattie, who had to leave for an 11:30 appointment. All right, moving now on to our reports. And number 10 is presentation of our Public Community Development Committee from the 4th of November, and Councillor Johnson, ask you to speak to that.
I'd like to present the Part 1 Public Community Development Committee recommendations from the 4th of November 2020 for adoption.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Bowen. Thank you. Any matters arising from those councillors? Okay. There being none, we will vote, please.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I thought I'd press the button. I just have a question.
Yep.
4120, the presentation of the Disability Reference Group, there were 2 recommendations made and there's just one included in our papers, and I'm just wondering why the second one isn't included.
Okay. My understanding and advice is that was just to the Chief Executive, and that has been actioned.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Cool. We're right. No other matters arising? Okay. We will vote, please. It's passed 14 votes for, none against. We move through to number 11, which is presentation of Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee recommendations from the 11th of November. I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Bowen, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to present the Part 1 Public Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee recommendations from the meeting of the 11th of November 2020 for adoption, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Barrett. Are there any matters arising from that? No? Right, we will vote, please. This passed 14 votes for and none against. We now move through to the presentation of the Finance and Audit Committee recommendations, and I'll get the Deputy Chair, Councillor Naylor, to speak to that, please.
Thank you. I'd like to move the recommendations from the Part 1 Finance and Audit Committee recommendations from the 18th of November meeting for adoption, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Moved by yourself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. Thank you. That's passed 14 votes for and none against. Right. We will now move into part 2. So I will look to move that the public be excluded. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And we look to vote, please. It's passed 14 votes for, none against.